Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to get started with our Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee work session. We have 3 items today. And our first item is a work session for us to make a recommendation on Expedited Bill 2119, property tax credit, elderly individuals and retired military service members, surviving spouse, which is sponsored by lead sponsor Councilmember Rice, who has joined us, and Council Vice President Katz, and it's also co-sponsored by Council President Navarro, myself, and Council Members Albornoz and Glass. This was introduced on June 25th, and a public hearing was held on July 16th. This bill would expand the property tax credit for surviving spouses of retired military service members. The bill would implement changes to the state enabling law made during the 2019 General Assembly session. Under Bill 21-19, a surviving spouse would be eligible for the credit if the individual is a surviving spouse of a retired member of the Uniformed Services, the Military Reserves, or the National Guard. The surviving spouse is at least 65 years old, and the surviving spouse has not remarried. Before we get into the conversation of the packet that Ms. Myhill has prepared for us, let me turn it over to Councilmember Rice for any comments.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I just really want to thank both Senator Will Smith, who's deployed abroad, as well as Delegate Janelle Wilkins for their sponsorship of this bill at the state level that was authorizing, allowing us to do this. As the son of a military veteran, it certainly is one in which I think that the most that we can do is continue to honor the sacrifices that are made by those who serve in our armed forces, and to understand that not only are the sacrifices made by those individuals, but by their families as well. And so certainly when surviving spouses are challenged with being able to afford to live here, we certainly need to make sure that we're doing all we can to honor the sacrifices that these men and women have made for us. And so from that perspective, I think that it's the right thing to do. I also want to say thank you very much to our Montgomery County chapter of the Military Officers Association of America, who has advocated in support of this bill, as well as our Veterans Commission here in Montgomery County, who has also advocated for this bill as well. I appreciate the co-sponsorship of everyone who has done so, and appreciate the work of this committee. I'm sure that we will find that this is something that we want to do in terms of, again, honoring our service men and women who have fought vehemently for us and done great things for us and made our way of life even better in our community. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And Council Vice President Katz, any?
No, Councilmember Rice has said it all for sure. The only thing I did want to ask about is that Ms. Sharon Brown sent a suggestion or a request that we include disabled veterans. We're not able to do that because of the state law, which I would be certainly want to sponsor, and I have a feeling all of us would, for if we could get state law changed. But did anybody let Ms. Brown know that that's the reason we couldn't do it?
I have not reached out to her, but I can certainly
Please
do so.
That. And tell her that, as far as I'm concerned, that should be on our list, that we ask our state delegation to do that for next year. Thanks. Yeah,
That'll be great. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you for introducing this legislation. Appreciate everything. I missed the boat on this, but if it's not too late, I'd be more than happy and would love to be a co-sponsor of the legislation. I'm new here, so I still learning the processes, I suppose, 8 months in, but thank you for introducing it. I think it's a critical area for us to really be focusing on. We can't do enough to offer our depth of gratitude for the service that not only those who wear our nation's uniform, but those families who they leave behind in order to do so. And I echo your comments about our friend and colleague, Senator Will Smith, who is living that sacrifice as we speak. So thank you for that.
Great. All right, so Ms. Myhill, what would you like to add?
Really don't have much else to say. You all are familiar with the history of this bill that was first enacted a couple years ago, and we've made some tweaks. As the state has tweaked the authorizing legislation, the council has typically followed up with its own tweaks to the bill. So I really don't have anything else to add.
Okay, well, the recommendation is to enact Bill 21-19, and so with that, I don't see any objection, I don't think, right? All right, so moved and seconded, and without objection, we're going to recommend it.
Not only do we move it, but we got a co-sponsor.
We even picked another co-sponsor. We're on a roll.
Side of the street.
There you go.
Better could be than that.
All right. Well, wonderful. Thank you, Councilmember Rice. Okay, item number 2 is a work session on another bill. This is Bill 13-19, County Property Disposition Reuse Analysis, sponsored by lead sponsor Councilmember Albornoz, and co-sponsored by Councilmember Rice, Jawanda Friedson, myself, Council Vice President Katz, Reamer, Hucker, and Glass. Everybody. Let's introduce on May 7th.
I have a feeling this is going to work.
And we did have a public hearing on June 18th, and we had one person who testified. Basically, this would modify the procedures for disposition of county property and require the executive to submit a reuse analysis to the county. And so I will turn it over to Ms. Myhill. I can only say that this is definitely another tweak, I think, to our property disposition law, which I think has been very, very useful law for the council to also have an opportunity to weigh in whenever public property is going to be disposed. But this issue of how will that particular property be used, it's been a question that comes up quite a bit. And so I think this is a very good bill by Councilmember Albornoz to add that piece to it. Ms. Myhill, can you just kind of walk through exactly what this will do to the law, to the current law?
This bill is rather narrow. It makes basically 2 changes to current law. Number 1 is that current regulations already require a reuse analysis, but this bill would require that analysis be transmitted to the council. The second thing that it would do is, although it's implicit in the law that the council has the authority to reject a declaration of no further need, this actually would make that explicit in the law. I did want to note that there are more broader concerns about the property disposition law and strengthening it. And there's a GO work session scheduled for September to talk about those broader concerns. So this bill in front of you is rather narrow, but it is on the schedule for a broader discussion.
All right, Councilmember Friedson.
Ms. Smile, I just want to thank you and council staff. We've had some conversations about that broader conversation, which I'm looking forward to have. I want to thank the council president for your leadership on this over time in really strengthening the council's role in the use of public goods and public property and public resources, which I think should be a core part of our role. I think this bill is very narrow, very targeted, very specific, and to me is about we have trees that fall in a forest, and this is making sure that the council, and by nature of the council, the public has an opportunity formally to hear it and to make sure that we're aware of it, which I think makes a lot of sense. And I just think that broader conversation of how we best utilize public assets for the public goods that we all are interested in pursuing, and how we make sure that we're on the same page, working in tandem with the executive branch of making sure that we're doing it is a really important conversation. So looking forward to supporting this bill, but also just as much looking forward to that broader conversation in the fall.
Great. So the recommendation says that there are no legal concerns associated with Bill 13-19. Council staff did already mention about broader comments regarding the disposition process, which we will address later in September. And with that, our staff recommends that we enact the bill. Is there a motion? Second. Without objection, we will enact the bill. Thank you very much. All right, so now we're on to our final item.
Craig's presence means efficiency.
We don't want you to leave now.
Consensus.
My guess is if he leaves, it's not going to be as efficient.
I don't think so, so here we go. Just brace yourselves now.
Yeah, there you go. Look at him run.
Oh, look at him.
Looks like he's jumping rope.
I know, it looks like there's a jumping rope situation happening.
That's good jump rope.
Instead of jumping ship, it's jumping rope.
Jumping ship. I like that.
There you go. All right, so let's see. So in terms of background, so this is the non-merit salary schedule. Expedited Bill 51-19 was enacted by previous council in March of 2016, requiring the executive to propose a salary schedule for department heads, principal offices, and other non-merit executive branch employees for approval by us at the council as part of annual operating budget for the county. The bill also requires that the council approve a salary schedule for future non-merit employees in the legislative branch. So by way of background, the executive did submit a proposed FY20 pay schedule on April 18th, but because of the short time frame that we had to review, we recommended deferring action until the committee had an opportunity to conduct a more detailed review. Obviously, we want to make sure anytime that we address something of this magnitude that it has its fair share of examination and debate. And so also as a legislative body, we have not made a decision either way regarding the FY20 non-merit salary schedule submitted by the executive, nor have we made final decision regarding the salary schedule for the legislative branch. So that's just kind of like by way of background. And I welcome everybody who is here. We'll go down the list soon so everybody can introduce themselves for the record. But for now, let me turn it over to, I guess, Ms. Price. Ms. Price and Mr. Howard have worked together on this. I really appreciate the packet. So you guys decide how you want to do the presentation. Okay.
I'll
Mr.
start
Howard.
off with just a little bit of a further explanation of kind of where we came from and why we're here. As the council president mentioned, the council did pass a bill in 2016. I did want to note that the any proposed salary schedule is prospective, so it would apply to newly hired employees after a salary schedule is enacted or approved by the council. So it would not impact any current employees of either non-merit employees in either the executive or the legislative branch. The council's legislation stemmed from an OLO report in November 2015 that looked at comparison to how the county director type positions and executive level positions compared with some other jurisdictions. And it also kind of looked back on a previous non-merit salary schedule that had been in place through 1997 for department directors. When the first executive branch non-merit schedule was proposed by then County Executive Leggett, the committee had held a detailed review and had several questions about the salary and some things that they were hoping that the executive branch could address to make some potential changes in the schedule that was submitted. One was that the executive Leggett had included a premise that the public sector salaries needed to keep up with the salaries in the private sector, which the council disagreed with. They thought that some of the salary ranges were too high for some of the positions, and they also had some questions about how the positions were grouped into the different salary bands. The council proposed those questions and suggested that the executive might look at revisions. The executive then submitted schedules in FY18 and FY19 that included that were exactly the same as he had submitted before without changes. And then we come to the FY20 proposed schedule, which actually Executive Elrich did make some changes, which I'll let Linda kind of go through.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the FY20 schedule that the executive submitted did make a number of changes. Notable, the special assistants, they are now labeled as X3 positions. Before they had been classified as X1 positions. Additionally, the Office of Community Partnerships Director, as well as the Regional Service Center Directors, had been categorized as X2 positions. However, they're now reflected as X3 positions. Additionally, the salary spread for the different pay, it's now been dropped down from 80% to 70%. I would just like to note that, again, the schedule wouldn't apply to current appointments. And some of those appointments that have been made, the executive, he's transmitted 14 appointments, and the council has gone through the confirmation process for those. It does not include the special assistant positions. Those have been appointed, but there was no council confirmation required on those. Of the FY20 positions that the county executive has sent over, 9 of those positions have come in under the midpoint for their class. And then for the 4 additional appointments that the executive has transmitted, they hover around between 50 and 65%. And then also there are 7 additional positions that the executive is still recruiting for.
And I also wanted to mention that the pay bands that the executive has proposed are X1, X2, X3, and then the CAO pay band. And on the back page of the packet on Circle 6, it has a listing of which departments, directors, which positions fall into each of the different things. So you can see how the positions are organized. And we have staff here from the executive branch, Karen Plachinsky, the acting director of the Office of Human Resources, Kimberly Williams, the acting director for business operations and performance, and also Corey Orlowski from OMB. And we thought it might be helpful for them to walk through the kind of decision thought process and some of the changes that they made in the executive branch when they were putting together the new schedule.
Okay. Ms. Plachinsky.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam President, council members. I think you two have done a very excellent job in terms of summarizing everything. In terms of what we've done, we did take a look at the public financial management report back in 2016 and really had looked at it and adjusted what their recommendations were and really aligned it with the CE's vision and trying to be more cost effective and sustainable. So as Linda has mentioned, we did reduce the bands from 80% to 70%. We also included a 2% cost of living in that adjustment as well. And we did move around a number of those positions to different bands, as Greg has pointed out as well. So I think we're in alignment with what was requested of us previously. We did not increase the number of bands. We felt that our strategy with the 3 bands with the number of positions really worked for Montgomery County. And the executive has been keeping, in terms of his appointments, within the midpoint of those bands and making a conscious decisions to keep it at a lower salary.
Okay. All right. Anybody else want to add anything?
Kimberly Williams the credit. She's really put this packet together in terms of presenting it and looking at it a little bit differently than what we have in the past. So I do want to give her credit for it.
Oh, wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Anything you'd like to add?
I don't think I have, I don't know if you can hear me. I don't hear myself. Is that good? Okay. I don't have much to add. I think that it was summarized pretty well. We did try to make the adjustments based on trying to align I noticed that one of the things that came up in the previous submissions of the salary schedule was some positions were in different bands, and we really took a look at the intention of the bands to make sure that people were aligned to the proper band. So you'll notice that one of the biggest changes was in the X2 and the position. There's only one classification that's there, and it's representative of the work that we expect to happen within the X2 band. Which is the Assistant Chief Administrative Officers. So that's the only position sitting there, and the other ones are really overseeing those non-primary departments.
And so does council staff believe that this comports in response to both the OLO report and then just generally what we had signaled was our ultimate goal?
Yeah, so this schedule definitely aligns much more with what the council was envisioning and some of the changes that the council asked for. I think that it doesn't make every change that I think the council discussed, but I do think it is much more representative of what the council was looking for when they reviewed those first couple submissions.
All right. Any questions from my colleagues?
You want to go ahead?
So I have a couple questions. First of all, I appreciate the move, and I was not part of those council discussions, although I associate myself with the broad context of where I think the council's interests were on that. I think that I share those views, and while I know it was a robust conversation and I followed it from afar, and I appreciated it. I think that is good, and I really do appreciate the sentiment of, looking to have a more cost-effective and sustainable government. I think we all share that. The questions are, how do we accomplish that? And I think there is this interesting balance of we want to be able to be in a position to attract the best talent from all over the region and all over the country, and sometimes all over the world, and we need to be able to pay for that talent. But I don't think that the public sector pays the same as the private sector. And I've been on that end of it, and I think there are certain benefits to the type of impact that you can make in the public sector, and I think those who work in the public sector understand that there is a certain sacrifice that you make working in the public sector, and so I don't think it has to be totally apples to apples, but it has to be enough that we don't miss out, and I think the better kind of comparison is the nonprofit world, our fellow government competitors of like-sized agencies, because while we are competing quite a bit with the private sector, I think those who are only looking for the highest salary they can get, we're not going to be able to keep up and compete for those. But those who are looking to balance being able to take care of themselves and their families and do work that is actually meaningful and serves a greater public good, that's that sweet spot and that balance that we're trying to find. I have, and I think maybe others might as well, just based on some conversations, but I have some questions on the legislative side, but I'll hold off for right now. But I did have just a couple quick questions based on, I think that the schedule moves us towards the direction I'm a little, I guess my two questions are, one, the hires that have been made up to this point. And one of the challenges that we get by the time we put this in place, hopefully, and we've certainly been making our interest known in hiring as much of the senior level positions in county government, which we would like to go as quickly as possible. But by the time this actually gets put in place and is formalized, most of those positions will have been filled. And so the question is, to me, of who is this impacting, and whether or not the positions that we have already hired in county government, whether we see that as in keeping with it. And so was this same idea part of those decisions, or is this, we see this as once this gets approved, that will be the way that new hires are viewed for these senior level positions?
To answer your question, and tell me if I'm not answering. So as we're bringing new people in, I believe we're bringing them in primarily in accordance with the schedule that is presented. So the recent hires that were made, most of them were around the midpoint of the salary range. There may be a few that are over that. So as new people are coming in, the thought is, yes, we will be bringing them in accordance with this schedule. We cannot go back and adjust people who are already here.
Right. Sure,
They
sure.
are already incorporated within the salary schedule.
Right.
There are some individuals that are higher, of course, than the midpoint, but that's attributed to the number of years of experience that they have and the relevant years of service that they have served. And so it's more representative of that. And so they may be above the midpoint, and we are not can't adjust.
Right, but it goes up to almost 100% in one
There are some-
instance. Inside that, I think the leadership, to me, I think the leadership on this starts from the top. I understand. I think there's a misconception frequently about these high-level positions that there's a huge fiscal impact. The reality, I recognize, is there really isn't. But the symbolism that it presents to the public of how serious we are in terms of our willingness to have the cost-effective and sustainable government, leading with the top-level people, I think is really important. I think that those symbols matter. I think it sends a very important symbol, just as much, if not more, to our rank and file personnel. Of what we're asking them to work in these difficult roles, doing important work, in the public sector, and the people they're reporting to, and the people those people are reporting to. I think it's important that we send that message. So the other question before, and I'll let others talk before I talk about a couple questions I have about the legislative side. But I have this question about the midpoint because, it's a really interesting dynamic. I always find it interesting. We have a band, and the band basically effectively starts at the midpoint. So to me, I just like some clarity on this. It kind of begs the question of what's the point of the midpoint before, what's the point of the band before the midpoint if our goal is to start people in their jobs as close to the midpoint as possible and go up, because with the exception of the ACAOs, we're pretty much at in one or two others that I can see here, we're basically more or less at midpoint or very close to midpoint and above, going all the way up to almost 100% at 0.3. And so there's not an even distribution of some below the midpoint, some above the midpoint. It's not really a representative band at all.
Yeah, so I think that several of the hires that have been made, of course, have been at the midpoint and some slightly above the midpoint. You might want to think of the midpoint as the market. Okay, so that's representative of the market. And so when we are recruiting and trying to attract qualified candidates, we gotta be able to offer them salaries that will allow them to come here or make the decision to join the county. So many of the people that we're probably attracting are highly qualified candidates, and therefore you would offer closer to the midpoint than you would the minimum of the salary range. And another point, I don't know if when you were talking about the private industry, when the study was done, they did look at private industry, but that was never incorporated in the development of the salary schedule at all.
Sure.
So it's representative only of the local governments and nonprofit organizations that.
Oh, and I totally appreciate that. I was referring to the previous conversation of the previous county executives' argument was that we have to compete with the private sector, and I was sharing the context of the prior council, I believe, based on my understanding of that public conversation, that we're never going to be able to compete dollar for dollar with the highest paid, senior level positions like these. Those who I'm recruiting, I'm hoping, are not just looking for the highest salary. They're looking for a combination of a salary that is, that values their skills, which I hope are at an elite level, but also represent the fact that those who work in the public sector want more than just to make the most money they possibly can make with their skills. They want to give back and use those skills to help as many people as possible. I guess where I still am trying to understand, and I don't have objections, I just think it's an interesting dynamic. It's hard to reconcile the idea if the market says that a position should pay at the midpoint, and we're only bringing people in who are talented. I mean, we should be one of the best places in the country to work. We should never find somebody who is below what the market would be for that particular position, because that would mean that they wouldn't be up to the standards of running a department or being the deputy director of a department, or running a major unit in Montgomery County. So that's, if we're talking about years of service and that, I get that argument, but it's just an interesting dynamic to say that this is the midpoint represents the market, but we want to be able to go way below that when we're not supposed to be asking people what their prior pay history is, and we're supposed to be paying them what is appropriate for the job that they're in because of our interests in pay equity and other issues. And so it more raises an interesting question for me of how the bands work and the role of the midpoint in those bands, if our goal and our thought process is to say we should start people around the midpoint and then they should be capped out, if they stay here for a long time at the maximum, then it begs the question of what the rest of the band is for. But not necessarily needing a response unless you have one. It's just more of an observation that I find to be somewhat interesting and not necessarily reflective of everything else that we're talking about. So thanks.
Very good point. Council Vice President Katz.
Thank you very much. First off, thank you for this packet. All of you. This is comprehensive, to say the extreme least, and been work done for two administrations at this point. And hopefully this will be the last administration that's going to be worked on. I do have some, and we had talked earlier today, Craig and Linda and I, about the concern about confidential aid positions aligning with the management leadership service, MLS. I believe confidential aides are in a category to themselves, and they really are. To me, they should be more aligned with the specialist, the special assistant to the executive, or whatever it should be. But I do think we should change that in some way, and that should be reflected.
So the development of the legislative branch part of the schedule, happened also a few years ago, and it was, there's three cohorts of non-merit employees in the legislative branch. You have the confidential aides, the hearing examiners and OLO director, and then the executive director position. So when this kind of initial option was created, it was trying to kind of say, all right, what should a band be that might fit in with those different groupings? And then the description, and it wasn't intended to say that the confidential aid position is the same as the MLS type positions. It was more kind of, here's a salary scale that already exists, and maybe we can use an existing schedule. So that's kind of the history of how those came about. But if the committee thinks that we need to rework the legislative branch portion of those different groupings, we could do that.
I do. I don't know where anybody else is, but I really do believe that, especially for the confidential aid side, I think there should be a separate, because it really is a very special type of an employee for each council member. And then the other thing that I was. It's not working. Well, you're better off. When my mic's not working, everybody's better off. But and then the other thing that it is interesting, the mics in this room. I mean, either they work too good or they don't work at all. I mean, no in between. Then the other thing that I do think should be specifically listed, and Linda, you had brought it up earlier, is that of the 14 appointments that the county exec has had, those are the ones that come before us as be confirmed. The other three, or his administrative assistants, are not. And I do think that should be reflected in here as well, that it should be a note. Please, I'll cut something off here.
I can update that to make a note that the special assistants are not necessarily confirmed by the council, but the executive does appoint those positions, and they're reflected on the salary schedule as well.
And then the other thing that we, in the earlier conversations, I don't know whether we refer to these as X1, X2, and X3. I was referring to them as like the Roman numerals, 11, 12, and 13. I don't know what the right term is, but if we could clear that up, maybe that would it should, as far as I'm concerned, X with a number or all Roman, whatever it is, but it's just, how do you refer to it?
That is something that we can clarify pretty easily.
So one of the things I just wanted to share with my colleagues regarding the legislative branch, as you know, we are in the process of engaging a consulting firm to look at just more broadly our staffing complement, and and I would agree with you just preliminarily with your observation. I do wonder if it may not be best for that audit to kind of go through, and then we can have a more robust conversation, because I really feel like in some ways our staffing has been super static in how it's been perceived, while changes, have taken place in the county that has impacted how we run our offices, how, the demands that are placed on our staff, especially on our chiefs of staff, and just on our, on the 6th floor, what are the implications of all of that? While I agree with you, I just don't want to, I have my own personal opinions about, how I would like to see all of this redone. But I do wonder if maybe it's best for us to go through that process first and then have almost like a full picture. So then we can kind of like make those decisions. But I agree. And I always say, a chief of staff that maybe was staffing the council 25 years ago, whatever. I mean, given the advent of the internet and emails and this sort of instant 24/7 kind 25/8, that's true, work that our staff, and especially our chiefs of staff, have to, do, because, you are not allowed to unplug. You just can't, because you do miss a lot. That's, that's significant. And I would love to be able to then kind of like come back, and then we can have a real robust, full conversation, make, these recommendations. Do we have like a timeline piece that we're running up against? Is that?
No. This doesn't go into effect until the council approves the first
Right.
one. You, in theory, could move forward with the executive branch schedule,
Right.
and then delay the legislative branch until that that study is complete and then have it presumably in place for the next operating budget.
Right, right.
So that could be an option.
Yeah, what do you guys think? I wonder if that's, Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if that would be possible. I think that would be appropriate. I mean, I
Yeah.
think we should put this to bed. There seems to be some level of consensus. It may not be perfect, but I think it's probably as close to
Yeah.
perfect as we're going to get agreement between the streets, the sides of the street. So I'd like, I think that would be us giving guidance as they move forward. I think I'd be comfortable with that. I do share very much the opinion. I think that it should be aligned with the special assistants that have now been moved, I guess, to X3. And I think that is appropriate to make it X3. But I think having it in the context of the broader conversation makes sense. But I would associate myself with both of your comments for both of your reasons. I think the level of seniority, the span of control, the political and policy expectations, the relationship, that role is very
Yeah.
similar in terms of what the skill set is. And I think it's been proven just in the reality of hiring between the last two administrations. Those roles have interchanged, frankly, in terms of the actual literal people who have occupied them and the skill sets that have been there. So I think that is reflective of the reality that it's a very congruent role. And I think that the pay scale should be reflected in what is the span of control, what is the expectation, who is the type of candidate that we believe is appropriate in that role, and what is the value and the appropriate pay that reflects that. And so I think, for those reasons, and I do agree very much with what you have said, Madam President, about the idea that the county has dramatically changed in size, and the scope of what is expected of the government has changed as a result of that, which is natural. And I think there has been a wide level of acceptance of that and even deference to the executive branch to adjust to those realities, as I think is appropriate for those changes. And I think that same level of expectation and recognition has not occurred on the legislative side. And I think that is to the detriment of the legislative branch being able to take on its duties and to do the work that people now expect us to do. So I very much agree, and I think splitting it up, moving forward with the executive branch with gratitude for actually being able to have some consensus here. I came in the fourth quarter. I had nothing to do with the consensus,
No
but
problem.
happy to be part of it. And I'm happy to move forward and appreciate all the comments.
Thank you. I really do appreciate how you framed this notion of the sort of disconnect between, how we do pay so much attention to, of course, how we're going to strengthen the executive side of things. But it is absolutely true that is at our own peril if we don't do the same with the legislative branch. And that's why I think that having this staff audit is going to really be helpful, and really appreciate that support as well. All right, so I'm hearing consensus on the executive side of this. I do think it's really awesome that we achieved this moment. We've arrived at this moment, and thank you for all that work that took place. Really appreciate that. So without objection, we're ready to move forward on that. And then we'll come back after that particular staffing audit for the legislative branch is done, and then we'll make some recommendations, but do agree that we're going to probably make some changes there. I can.
Now, you realize if it snows in July, it's your fault, because it's taken this long. It's going to be a cold day in July when this happens.
No. All right. I think that's it, right? So we're adjourned. Thank you so much.